Hello, everyone. I'm Tino Desa, and on behalf of Goa Writers, I welcome all of you to this session. Romulus Whittaker first came to India when he was 8 years old. After a few years of school, he returned to America, where he attended college, worked in the army, and then worked in a serpentarium where his passion for wildlife found special focus. Soon after that, he returned to India and started the snake farm in Chennai and the Crocodile Bank Trust. He is the winner of several awards, an Emmy, the Whitley Award, and the Rolex Award, and also a Padma Shri. But most important, I think, is the recognition he has received in having a species of boa named after him and a species of viper named after him. I don't think there's anyone else who has two reptiles named after him. Discussing his book, Snakes, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, My Early Years, with him is Aaron Lobo. In his own words, Aaron is a naturalist at heart, a marine conservation scientist by training, and a gourmet by aspiration. He tends to see the world through two lenses: nature and food. And sustainability is at the heart of his worldview and his work. Among his many responsibilities, he co chairs the Sea Snake Specialist Group. So, who better than he to be in conversation with Romulus Whittaker, the snake man of India? Welcome.
I'm just recovering from this nasty pharyngitis. So, and I'm also kind of partially deaf in one ear because of that. I just, brought. Can you hear me? The back? At the back? Everyone. So I was saying I'm just recovering from this nasty pharyngitis, which has also made me partially deaf in my left ear. And I just mentioned that to Rom, and Rom says, actually, Aaron, I was going to rely on you for if people ask me questions that I wasn't able to hear.
Now,
Yeah, so you guys would really have to shout out your questions today, and bear with me if you hear any chokes or any other sort of unpleasant sounds through the discussion. But I mean, with that glowing introduction, I don't have too much more to say except that I've been inspired and driven by Rom since a very, very young age. Since I was like back in my school days, I think back in the early 90s when I actually heard about him. But what I want to narrate, I mean, everyone involved in reptiles over here, can you raise your hands in some way? There's a whole bunch of you here. Who was even interested in reptiles? Please raise your hands. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Has been inspired or touched by Rom's work in some way, because what Rom did was this, besides catching snakes and the drugs and rock and roll, he was also able to garner people to a much larger vision, okay, where he set up things that are going to way, outlive him, whether it's the Irula Snake Park Trust, or whether it is the Madras Crocodile Bank Trust, or whether it is the Agumbe Research Station or the Andaman Nicobar Environment Team. All these setups, which many of us have kind of, worked in or been part of, are something that, has been part of a very broad vision. But, who is Rom behind all that? We all know him as this very hyper-focused naturalist. But before that, I just want to, get to one little small story with my first meeting with Rom, which was way back in, I think, 97 or 98. Rom was visiting Goa because they had plans to they had too many crocs in Mahabalipuram, and they wanted to start another croc bank somewhere in Goa. So three of us, Harvey, Neil, and myself, Rahul could not come on that day, but we said, let's take Rom out for a little jaunt. And so Rom and his wife Janaki were really excited. They said, hey, thanks a lot, guys. And So what we did was Harvey and Neil ran this sort of environment outfit or an ecotourism company called Southern Birdwing. So what we did was we drove along the Mandovi, stopping at various points. Harvey kept getting distracted with the birds, and Rom says, "Okay, guys, let's not waste time. I want to see some crocs." And we went up all the way to the Banastari Bridge, which is this bridge that links. It kind of crosses the Kumbarswa Canal, which is the main canal that lots of these eco tour companies ran trips, and that's where a lot of muggers were concentrated, the marsh crocodiles. And Harvey said he spotted a mugger on the mudflat below. So we actually walked down a little footpath, a pie of art below. And when we went down there, we could not see the croc. We looked all around, we looked in the mangroves. And Rom was the one who spotted the croc. And then he said, "Oh, wow, it's a large female. She could have a nest somewhere." And then he began to make these very strange squeaks or croaks, you know, which actually got the mother's head up. And she actually began to move towards us. And apparently, that's what the mothers do when the eggs are about to hatch. They help the young ones, just crack the eggshells and get the young ones out. And that's exactly what she was possibly doing. Lots of other larger males do that because it's kind of also predatory. I mean, they kind of figure out there's young there, they'll go and eat them. So you have this, and apparently crocs are research has recently shown that crocs are attracted to primate baby calls. So if a baby calls, they'll come rushing towards it because it's almost an evolutionary instinct, possibly because of monkeys that fell, by chance into a river or whatever, and they were grabbed. So that's a very recent study. But anyway, I mean, all this long story cut short, I mean, it kind of embedded me. This is something that was very vivid because it just told me the kind of person he was, in the field. And with someone with real skin in the game, way beyond the croc bank, way beyond all the stories we heard of this hyper focused person who spent all his life just doing that one thing. And as you'll see, that's what we want to discover over here. And I think every one of us over here has a sort of a life calling. At some stage in their life or the other, or very early in life, they're passionate about something very deeply. But a lot of us lose it along the way. Some of us never follow it for various reasons. I mean, it could be, family pressures, whatever, financial pressures of having to be a herpetologist or whatever it may be. But I think Rom's journey was not a linear one as many of you all would imagine. It had lots of ups and downs. You worked as a merchant mariner. He's worked in the army. He's done a whole bunch of things and not really gone up to doing his PhD or anything of that sort. It's real hardcore skin in the game. And basically all those mishaps helped him find his way back into this. And that's what we're going to discover. And Rom, welcome. I'm really so pleased to kind of be here with you. And I really want to start with my very, very first question, which was your very early years. And they're going to be really focusing on his book, Snakes, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, which is co-written by his wife, Jackie Lennon. And this is really early years of the too. Can you guys hear me at the back? No, the mic's out. Right. Good talk. First year. Well, saying yes. Sure enough. Can you guys hear me now? Right at the back. Sorry. I don't know if you heard much of what I was saying, but yeah. So, so early in your life, you spent the first few of your years of your life, I think up to the age of about 5 in upstate New York, where your mother moved as a single mother to this huge, beautiful ranch house, which had 25 bedrooms in a place called Hoosick. And this was your first kind of deep dive into nature. At a very young age, you were exposed very deeply. So I really want to get to this whole point of nature versus nurture. So a lot of people say, "Hey, Aaron, you're either born with loving snakes. It's very difficult to develop these interests later." They probably tell Ben Hill the same thing. You're either born loving them, but you can, I mean, these are things that can also be cultivated, or you put some concerted effort in cultivating these things. But Rom, what is it really? You had this kind of deep dive into nature, but your mother, Doris, also played a very important role. She gave you your first fishing rod with a hook that she made of a little pin. She gave you a whole bunch of things. very early on exposed you to some of those facets. What do you think of the role of nurture here was, or the nature of the nurture is what I may call it?
We got to show that fruit.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah, this is a really good question. And my brother sitting in the front row here will confirm that we had probably the strangest and most wonderful mother in the world. Because, okay, a lot of you are mothers. And if your kid brings home a snake, what will you say to him? Or her? No, I don't even go there. But she said, when I first brought my first snake home, she said, "How beautiful." Okay, man, that must have turned my brain into something else. Well, here I am, and they call me Snake Man of India. Okay, that's cool and all. But yeah, it really changed my brain right away, right from the beginning.
Thanks, Rom. Yeah, we have a projector here, and we have a little viral video, on the book that we would just like to screen before we continue. So could you play video 1, please, Nilima?
Yeah, got that. Good.
Yes, please. Yeah. If someone could turn off the light. Yeah. So you saw the little viral video, and so this is really sort of the making of Rom in many ways. I mean, his early years, what really inspired him, the stuff that he did that was completely unrelated to anything related to snakes. But one of the things you did a lot of, Rom, was you killed a lot of stuff when you were young. I mean, whether it was like birds, uh, snakes. I mean, you were a taxidermist for a while. You actually in one of your pages.
My excuse.
Yeah, Rom, in one of your pages, you actually said you had a lust for weapons, and there's a chapter 10 over there that actually talks about an appetite for destruction. So I mean, like, so a lot of people here look up to you as this holy grail of wildlife conservation in the country. So could you give us a little background into, what makes a hunter or a fisher a good conservationist?
Well, this is Sir Peter Scott. Can you hear me back there? Okay. And Richard Fitter, the people who started one of the world's first environmental organizations, the Fauna and Flora International, they wrote a book called The Penitent Butchers. And it was very aptly named because these guys, as it was said by yet another author, that these guys said that they were running out of things to shoot. So we better do something about it. And that is how conservation was born. So, man, this is just another excuse for Rom Whitaker being the killer that he was. People have their bird life list. I had a bird shoot list. And it's terrible in this day and age to even think that way. But then I got into taxidermy, and that was scientific. Man, I got so many excuses to cover up my real, what was really a zest for hunting. And then I'd explain, like, yeah, it's a male thing. Men just like hunting, hunter-gatherers, men are the hunters, women are the gatherers, which we found out is also bullshit because there are actually very strong women hunters in the historical, whatever you look at in any historical, any history of any peoples in the world. Yeah.
But I completely concur with you. I mean, a lot of us kind of grew up. I remember sort of preserving my first little scorpion. Actually, my aunt gave me formaldehyde when I was 8, and I still have the little scorpion with me. And we had to do a lot of that stuff, for the cause of science. It got even worse, and I think it's not the love for the individual so much as really the quest for exploration that drives a lot of us. And I think that is something that kind of comes out not just with you and Sir Peter Scott, but with Jim Corbett, Kenneth Anderson, name a whole bunch. F.W. Champion, from like he began to shoot with this camera at the end. He got so sick of hunting that he began to shoot with this camera. So I think, and I think nowadays, if you look at it, but I just want another comment, Rom. I mean, what did hunting and fishing actually sort of teach you just about being out there in the wild? What was the connection that it brought in? If you could comment on that, please.
Yeah, I think that was the main point, which I only sort of in later years or, nowadays sort of start thinking deeply about it. that's what brought me into the wilds, this first deep interest in hunting. And meeting hunters, meeting tribal people, and grooving with them and learning from them and learning about the forest and how you can actually go out in the forest with nothing more than maybe a little piece of tarpaulin to keep you dry, maybe a little poha and in a little dekshi and for you to eat. You don't need any great camping skills or any great camping equipment. You just go out there and curl up and go to sleep. Of course, elephants are a bit scary, and so we'd light a fire and, we're going to keep it burning all night to keep the elephants away. We'd wake up in the morning and there'd just be a pile of ash. And luckily no one had woken up, but no elephant had come either. But really, that's what brought me into the jungle. And I was just very lucky to go to the Kodaikanal school. In those days, it wasn't an international school, it was a missionary school. And less said about that, the better right now. But the main thing was, these guys encouraged this little kid. I even kept a pet python hidden under the bed, and they let me keep an air gun. Have schools changed? Yes, I believe so. I've just been encouraged in my weird pursuits all my life. I was such a lucky boy.
Yeah, I think you would have been deeply depressed, Rom, if you had to go through all the red tape we currently go through these days, from health and safety to human ethics to name it. I mean, we've got like forms after forms to fill, and I think you kind of wonder how these things evolved and where it's actually taking us. But I want to kind of move on to another very big part of your book, which was actually doing stuff, discovering yourself, doing stuff, because you felt that you were part of like a very traditional route, finding a job as a merchant mariner, joining the ships. Could you give us a brief sort of a snapshot of that period, and how did that show you what you didn't want to be?
Yeah, well, I was looking for a job to make money in the United States when I went there after finishing my high school years. I went actually to go to college, and I managed to survive a whole year of college. And then I had to find a job. And being a merchant marine meant I made quite a bit of money because you're out at sea, you don't spend anything. But going across the North Atlantic in the wintertime in a relatively small ship is an experience that has to be experienced to be able to describe it. Those waves were 40 feet tall, and the ship would sort of be floundering around, and then you'd see a whole pod of pilot whales swimming around, just having a great time diving through the waves, and you're wondering whether your ship is going to be the next ship to flip over with the next big wave. Amazing. But I was making money. And, but at the same time thinking, this could get pretty old pretty fast. I've got to find something that's really right down my alley. I mean, I hadn't lost my love of snakes yet, but I had to find another job.
Oh, that's super interesting, and I think that's about the time you were already in touch with this very famous and someone you really sort of admired from early on, Bill Haast. He's someone that I read about, and I've always wanted to go there. He started the Miami Serpentarium, but Rom writes a lot about him in great depth. He was a very sort of a stoic personality, and he set up the Miami Serpentarium. And interestingly, it's one of the times when actually Rom literally and metaphorically jumped ship, landed at the Miami Serpentarium, and that was pretty life-changing for you, right? I mean, could you give us some moments from there? Because I think those are pretty special, particularly about the legend Bill, whose apparent blood could be used as anti-venom to treat people who were bitten by snakes. And he survived more than 80 venomous snake bites?
He survived 178 snake bites, folks. And people used to say, how the hell do you get bitten so often, Mr. Haast? He said, well, if you handle 250,000 snakes a year for venom extraction, you would also get bitten. And we had a quick sort of report, explanation for that. But this guy, like Aaron said, was a very stoic, quiet man. And even though he was our guru, the several people who worked for him and with whom I'm in touch to this day, were disappointed that he wouldn't interact with us very much. We had to learn by observation, by seeing how he did stuff. His work ethic which sticks to me today. In fact, the people who have worked for me at the snake park in Croc Bank says, "How can you make us work so hard?" Well, it's because I learned from him exactly what you have to do to get anywhere, to get things done. And I really learned so much from him. What an incredible human being he was. He injected venom into his system from the 1950s in very small quantities and built up an immunity to snake venom. And he said, "I'm going to live to 100," and he did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Rom, could you also tell us the little instance where Bill goes all the way to Peru to rescue this little boy who's dying of a coral snake bite?
Yeah, they landed a helicopter in front of the Serpentarium on US Highway number 1. And Bill jumps into the helicopter and they go to the Homestead Air Force Base and he gets into this fighter jet and they land it down in Quito in Peru. And am I right?
Yeah.
So, okay. And he has to go out into the jungle and give a transfusion to this little boy who'd been bitten by a coral snake who was near death. His blood was so full of antibodies that they saved the boy's life. And he did this about a dozen times with various people who had been very badly bitten by venomous snakes. And quite an incredible series of stories.
That's that's really sort of interesting, and that's a chapter that everyone should definitely read. I mean, the entire book is full of it's a great fun way of actually looking at the field of herpetology. But one of the things that you've done besides the myriad other jobs from the army to the merchant navy was actually sort of catching snakes from the wild and selling them. That's something would be a big no-no today. Yeah. And we have many people in the audience here who are probably like looking, but that's something Rom did to actually make money to buy his journey back to India. At that point, this was back in the late 60s, I think 67 or so. Could you tell us a few of your adventures down in the Everglades where you and your buddy Hayward Clamp, went around collecting snakes? And maybe I'll get to the other one, which is about the green rock rattlesnake after that.
Okay, yeah. I was working for Bill Haas at the Serpentarium, but my salary was only $65 a week, which wasn't very much even in those days. And so my buddies and I, Hayward Clamp, Attila Becke, and a couple of other really close pals of mine who knew a lot more about the Everglades than I did and taught me so much, we'd go out and catch snakes and sell them to the animal dealers, sell them to zoos and to the venom production laboratories. And that's really how we made our living. But it taught me so much about snakes' habits and so much about the Everglades, which I really fell in love with.
The thing is, I'm constantly probing Rom because he's not getting to the real stories, that actually he's constantly sort of skirting over them. But there's one, okay, the thing about snake handlers you'll realize is they quickly run out of bags, right, Benel? They're always running out of bags, so we use whatever we can find. So there's a time Rom was using his pant trousers and whatever else he could find until one day he caught this really gigantic rattlesnake in the Everglades, a massive, I think a 6-foot Eastern Diamondback, which you were then carrying on your crotch. Can you give us a bit about that, please?
Yeah, well, hey man, I didn't have a Jeep and all that fancy stuff. I had a motorbike. In fact, it was a BSA 500 single for those of you who are into it. Great bike. But here, a 6-foot Diamondback, which I've just put in a bag. And I'm saying, no, how am I going to get it home? I couldn't put it in the back, motorcycle box. It was much too big for that. So I laid a couple of snake bags over my legs and crotch, and this animal was big, okay? So I set her on top, after I first started the bike, set her on top of my lap, so to speak. Someone said that men don't have laps, but I had a lap. and I drove all the way back to Miami, always thinking, don't bite. But sure enough, I got it home, and everything was okay. But that was just one of hundreds of stories, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, with kind of risks like this, and it's something that pretty much every herpetologist, snake enthusiast, snake catcher has gone through. No matter how careful you are, there's always a risk of getting bitten, and it possibly will happen at some stage in your life, if you've been catching snakes fairly regularly. I want you to narrate that little part, and if you could do a reading, that would be great. From your book, on your time in Arizona where you were catching snakes to make money to get back home to India with a little green rock rattler.
I was in this beautiful place called the Huachuca Mountains, which is on the Mexican border in southern Arizona. Man, you can't believe how beautiful it is, with about 12 different species of rattlesnakes you could find. I mean, wow, heaven for a guy like me. I walked carefully across a massive rock slide, alert for the soft buzz of a small rattler, a particular species I was looking for. At the first sound, one excavated the rocks, but the rattle grew fainter. The snake had retreated inside. I had to be faster next time. Careful not to start a rock slide, I made my way. Another snake disappeared under a flat rock. On lifting the stone, I caught sight of a slate gray coil near my hand. Too late! The small lance-shaped head of a green rock rattler shot out and bit deep into my left thumb. You dumb shit, I berated myself. My thumb burnt like a hot iron drilling into flesh. This was no dry bite. Although in pain, I wanted the snake. I grabbed it with my tongs and dumped it into a bag. Not knowing how bad the snake bite was going to be, I didn't waste my time in that remote spot and retraced my steps for the 3-hour hike back to Nell's barn. Exhausted from the agony, I slumped beside a stream and drank deeply. I made an improvised sling with a bag for my throbbing hand and rested in the shade of a tree for a few minutes. The swollen thumb had turned blue like an overripe fruit, stiffened and oozed fluid from the puncture wounds. I wiped it with a damp handkerchief and tied it loosely around the bite to keep the flies off. My small medical kit contained no painkillers. I did, however, have a stash of marijuana. I tapped a thimbleful into a corncob pipe for a smoke. The familiar high took the edge off the agony. I felt better enough to continue on my way. About a mile later, I began sneezing nonstop, which made me even more tired. Then my armpits, crotch, and head started itching. I had no time to dwell on this new, unfamiliar symptom of an allergic reaction to venom. The distance passed in a blur. The sneezing abated, but I continued scratch, as if I was bedeviled by fleas. A parked car stood in Nell's yard, and the sound of people's voices came from the house. If her guests saw my puffy face with a snotty nose while I raked my privates like an uncouth simpleton, they would run a mile. I stumbled behind the barn without being spotted and sat under an apple tree with my back resting against the trunk. Sweat trickled from my brow and my shirt was damp. I toked on my corncob pipe, which eased the pain. 2 snake bags stuffed with dry leaves made good pillows, and I stretched out, gazing into the branches. I sank into a deep sleep, listening to redstarts warbling in the overhead foliage. On waking up, I had no sense of how much time had gone by, since my watch had busted several days earlier. A troop of quatamundis surrounded me, chewing on fallen apples. Am I hallucinating? They kept a wary eye on the prone human. When I propped myself up in a sitting position, they scattered and watched me from a distance. These guys are a bit like civet cats. The swelling had now reached the elbow. A deep, dull ache that throbbed with my pulse replaced the burning pain. I peeked around the barn. The car had left. I knocked on the door and told Nell about the bite. My swollen arm concerned her, and she urged me to leave for the hospital. The nearest one at Bisbee was an hour's drive away, and my last excruciating experience at Beaumont Hospital lingered in my memory. It was a tiny snake, I reassured him. It couldn't be dangerous. The swelling has stopped, and it's not even painful anymore. I'll be fine. It doesn't look good, she said. Anyway, you better stay in the house. After we had a sumptuous meal of deer steak and baked potatoes, she pointed me to her guest room. At night, I got up in the pitch dark to take a leak, but lost my balance and fell down. I was blind. 100 worries assailed me as I lay there. I should have taken Nell's advice and gone to the hospital. Now it's too late. Should I call for help? Am I dying? Nell hadn't... Well, should I ask her to drive me to Bisbee? I had already worried her enough. I sat upright, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. After about an hour, my vision started returning, like an old TV set warming up. The night light and the furniture were blurred at first, and then they came into sharper focus. Unsteadily, I stood up and leaned against the wall, waiting for my balance to return. I staggered into the bathroom, and then I returned to bed. I woke to birdsong and the morning sun streaming in through the window. Wow. That was good. was alive.
Yeah, and I think you have several more stories to tell like that, and you were able to buy your journey back to India. Could you give us a brief snippet of what that felt like to just get back home?
Yeah, the book has only a page or so about my arrival back home, but I was on a freight ship. I was a passenger on a freight ship. It was kind of weird to be a passenger on a ship that I used to work on. And I'd wake up in the morning and think, no, it's time to go to work. He said, no, hey, wait a minute, I'm a passenger on this ship. I just paid $500 to be on this ship. And it took us, 58 days to get from New York to Bombay because the Suez Canal was closed. It was during the 5-day war, and we had to come all the way around South Africa, which took an extra 15 days. It was an endless trip. So here I am parked in the ship, parked in Bombay Harbor, and waiting for I think they had to have a medical officer come and check the ship out. And I finally got ashore, and I remembered a bit of Hindi, and I knew where I lived. I lived on Marine Drive. I knew my mother lived on Marine Drive, and it was next to the Nataraj Hotel. So I said, Nataraj Hotel, baaju mein jayega. And they said, oh, aapko Hindi janta hai? And I said, well, thoda. But anyway, and I got home, and there was this teenage boy looking down from the second floor. And, I'd left 6 years before, and that teenage boy was just a kid then. It was Neil sitting in the front row here. And he looks down, and my nickname was Breezy in those days. He says, Breezy! That was my fantastic homecoming. And that's all I've written in the book here. So you got to stick around for the second volume to learn what happens next.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rom. On that note, I'd just like to end with one last question, okay? And this is really about shifting baselines, yeah? What you've seen, say, in the Palni Hills, in Kodaikanal, in the Florida Everglades, in Mumbai, and wherever else, Mahabalipuram, that coast. I mean, things have changed so drastically that they are completely unrecognizable. How do you stay optimistic with all this? And are you really optimistic? That's the bigger question.
That's a tough question, and I could have a very negative answer to that. All you Goan citizens are facing the same thing with people moving in and buying up tracts of land and high-rises coming, and oh my God. I live in a wonderful place right now outside of Mysore, but they've just made a highway between Bangalore and Mysore. Mysore is going to become another Bangalore. I mean, what should I say? Should we just all commit suicide, or should we just sort of go with it and do our best for it? I guess that's the answer. Because there's still, India still has all its predators, except the cheetah, which they are trying to bring back. But when you think about it, the rest of the world has wiped out all its major predators. India still has it. India's still got so much wonderful wildland. We're doing okay in certain areas. We've got a weird government. Yes, I agree. I'm not going to go into that. I'll probably get arrested as soon as I leave the room. But, let's keep fighting for it. And I know there's a lot of you involved very deeply in this right now. So let's not give up the fight. Yeah.
Yeah. And thanks, Rom. I think that was a very realistic response. And before we break for questions, we have another 3-minute video. If you could please.
One second, let me intro this just briefly. You know that I work with the Irla tribe in southern India. I can't tell you how deeply I feel about my peer group, my real peer group of snake people, the Irlas. And they are just wonderful people. They are totally unsung. We started together something called the Irla Snake Catchers Cooperative Society in 1978, folks, going way back. My sons would say, what was it, 1878, Dad? No, 1978. But it's still supplying most of the venom being used to make antivenom in India, saving hundreds of thousands of lives, okay? So this is an applause for the Irlas, not for me, for the Irlas. But anyway, we had this really weird idea. We heard about the Everglades, and someone, people had baby pythons as pets, which are just a couple of feet long, lovely little creatures. So then these baby pythons would grow to about 6 or 8 or 10 feet long in a couple of years. And mom and dad would say, get rid of this huge creature. I mean, it's getting dangerous now. So they would just let him go out in the Everglades. It's in the wild, no problem, But it is a problem. There are tens of thousands of Burmese pythons in the Florida Everglades. This is a swamp as big as the Sundarbans. 1 million acres of swampland. There's no way they can finish off all the pythons there. But the Irla community used to catch snakes for the snakeskin trade, and they almost made the python go extinct in Tamil Nadu, anyway, in our state. But we hatched this idea with a couple of colleagues of mine at the University of Florida. We'll bring the Irlas over there, and they'll extinctify, is that a word? Get the pythons that are in the Everglades. And so we did an experiment. 2 Irlas, Masi and Vadivelu, came with us, with Janaki and I, as the translators, to Florida at the instance of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission to try and catch and teach the local snake hunters how to really catch pythons. This little video clip shows just one little episode of the catching that we did there. So let's see that with the lights off, please. It doesn't need sound. It's mostly visual. Juicy things are this. They find a fresh shedded skin, and that's the first instant that a snake is close by. And it was a big one. You didn't know pythons had such huge teeth, did you? That python weighed 50 kilos. One day's catch. I mean, what a fantastic time they were having. You know, catching pythons in Tamil Nadu, of course, would be illegal. And here they were, free range, catch as many as you can. They loved it.
Thank you. I'm thank you, Rom. This was really great. Can everyone give him a big hand? Yeah, it was great. We're opening the floor to questions now. I think Vivek is at the back. We've got about 15 minutes. Am I right?
Sure.
15
We've
minutes?
got one guy with an ear,
Yes? 10 minutes? Okay. Thank you.
and Aaron's got an ear which doesn't work, and my hearing isn't so good.
Like he said, sharp. I have a question. That is, Ross, what did the Iraq do with those 5 pounds that were bought in Florida? Had something to go on. It's quite fascinating. There's a question that the back, and I will organize on your book.
I'm not ready that much. But I was wondering, how with those old ship early, it was so romanticized that when there were wrong things happening, you were still romanticized. At this stage, are there any regrets? Anything you would undo and change?
I'm not going to confess that. Yeah, I mean, I think the killing stuff has totally changed me now. I caught a big catfish recently in Tetikera, which is the lake that we live next to. And I had to, I wasn't going to let it just sit there and eat gas. I had to chop its head off basically in a particular way which shatters the brain with a large machete. And it was painful for me to do that. And I realized that to let it sort of asphyxiation didn't appeal to me at all. So I've become a very soft fellow. These things do affect you. But on the other hand, I like to eat catfish. So what are you going to do? Those of us who are non-vegetarians are really cool people. Because we usually don't do the killing ourselves. Somebody else does it. We host it to us humanely. I have a feeling we don't. So you get it's a conundrum. Now, we could go and have another hour's discussion about this philosophically, but it is true. I would go and write a bit of the stuff related. I'm not going to confess it this time. Thanks for the honesty.
One thing, sorry. Your title is, what's your title? The book?
Speak out West.
No, you left out a very important part of the discussion. What's the title of your book?
The drugs or the rock and roll?
Oh, you left out the drugs and the rock and roll.
Well,
That's all right, Mama.
that's all right now, Mama. Just anyway you do, well, that's all right. Yeah, that's all right. That's all right now, Mama. Anyway you do.
Yeah, one question. Thanks.
For a budding herpetologist or anyone getting into the field of animal rescue and conservation, what would your advice be to them, and how important is an educational degree to get into this sort of field?
Man, I'm the very wrongest person in the world. I hated school. My college was a disaster. The only reason why I passed was because I did a good paper in the sociology class on how wonderful the communist state of Kerala was, because it was the most well-read state in the whole country of India, and all these kids in the class are like communist. Now this was the time in the '60s when America was very well, it still is anti-communist. But yeah, I believe in India you really do have to get a degree in having it's realistic to get a degree, and then you can join an organization. Because if you don't have those credentials, you probably won't get into that. So to be really honest, you probably do have to come to that. But I think the passion that keeps you going is much, much more important.
Because here, in my anyone who wants to mind it. You talked a lot about killing and getting into the conservation area that way. Where do you see the opportunity or the intersect between wildlife destruction here in the country with poachers, all of that, and bringing, a skill set that they have, right? Like the same way you could add into that line actually.
Yeah, what's your question?
No, so the question is, like, what kind of work that it's an open question. With is there work that's being done around that with, you know, people who are trackers, poachers, those kind of things, who have a very specific skill set on wildlife as well,
Yeah.
and what work is being done on that to bring them into
No work is done. India is a country where we do not practice conservation. We practice preservation. Conservation is something very different. I was a very fortunate person, which you'll have to wait till volume 2 to read about, but I'll briefly give you an idea. I worked as a production manager for the crocodile project in Papua New Guinea, where tribal people to this day, and this was back in the late 70s, early 80s, and as a production manager, I was in charge of helping to set up crocodile farms amongst village peoples, where clones would then collect crocodile eggs and baby crocodiles and rear the babies so that they could sell the skins. They had no other way of making a living. They still don't have a way. They're living in very remote parts of the country. We had an operation where we would send in small Cessna aircraft and land on ridiculously tiny airstrips. It's scary as hell. Pick up a load of baby crocodiles and take it back to commercial farms. And these commercial farms are still going strong. This is called sustainable use of wildlife. Say it to anybody in India today who is, you know, higher up in the realms of power, and they're going to say, no way, this will open the floodgates to poaching and hunting. We cannot allow this to happen. On the other hand, we've got a surplus of crocodiles in various parts of the country, including the Andaman Islands, including Gujarat and other places. And these animals, these crocs, have come back into a society which doesn't know how to live with crocodiles anymore, and people are getting injured and killed by them. Now, if we started crocodile farming, on the other hand, I'm not going to go into this, man. This go on for hours. You get the idea, you get the message. Sustainable use of wildlife is very positive conservation. It's working in Australia, it's working in New Guinea, it's working in many other countries. Not in India.
I'll add to that.
Yes, that's a beautiful.
We have tried some parts, like the Andamans, with the swiftlet, which the scheduled species was de-notified, and but then again, the policies keep on changing. And yeah, as you are rightly saying, we have lots of wild animals. We are trying to bring poachers into mainstream or using them as a tracker, like in Bandipur, Periyar they have done it, and a few examples here and there. But yeah, it's up to us, you know, once we open the flood gate, then they become the floodgates because there are too many of us. I think there's somewhere we have to also think about that. Everything cannot be eaten or harvested.
At the beginning of the session, Aaron, when you asked everyone, is anyone familiar with reptiles? I wanted to ask you, does that include people who are like reptiles? Because I know, yeah. But anyway, on behalf of Goa Writers, I thank Ram and Aaron for this very enjoyable and engaging session, and I thank all of you for participating. The next session will begin in 5 minutes.
One last word. If you buy the book, please write a little review in Goodreads, because then we'll be able to sell thousands of copies more.
Audience,